Welcome to our presentation on how the Writing Center can be a more inclusive place for ESL students. I'm Maya Calderon, and I'm a junior at Westridge and a tutor in our Writing Center.
I'm Christina's son. I am also a junior at Westridge and a fellow at the Writing Center. Okay, so first we're going to go over some of the defining terms that we'll be using in our presentation. So I'm going to read off this list so that we're all familiar with your definitions and we all share the same understanding of what is being said when we refer to these terms. So to begin, the vernacular is the language or dialect spoken by the ordinary people in a particular country or region. The term ESL refers to the use of English by speakers with different native languages. Standard English is the variety of English that has undergone substantial regularization and is associated with formal schooling, language assessment, and official print publication. Diversity is the practice or quality of including or involving people from a range of different social and ethnic backgrounds and of different genders, sexual orientations, and etc. And lastly, equity is the quality of being fair and impartial. And inclusion also is the practice or policy of providing equal spaces and access to opportunity and resources for people who might otherwise be excluded or marginalized, such as those who have physical or intellectual disabilities and members of other minority groups. And to be fully transparent, the scope of our presentation was initially much broader and even included how the usage of American Vernacular English, AAVE, could be addressed within the Writing Center. But by doing extensive research, you will be hearing shortly, we discovered that there was so much to focus on within examining the ESL learners' experience and the practice of using standard English in itself. Yeah. Okay, so now we want to introduce you all to the concept or philosophy of a writing center. As its own institution, there are, of course, rules, whether they are spoken or unspoken, about how a writing center functions. And something we feel that is imperative to address is the relationship between coach and student. Our writing center focuses heavily on self-improvement, and our goal is to use the paper that students walk into the writing center with as a vehicle to help students reflect and create writing habits that will aid them for future papers too. And this ties into our belief that coaches should never be holding a pen in their hands when guiding students, because there's a very fine line between editing and coaching. And goals to facilitate growth and help students undergo a process of self-reflection, not modify their writing on our own.
Now I want to propose Stephen North's idea of what a writing center should be and his philosophy to kind of standardize what we mean by writing center philosophy when we bring it up throughout our presentation. So in a writing center, the object is to make sure that writers, and not necessarily their texts, are what get changed by instruction. Our job is to produce better writers, not better writing. Acknowledging the limiting nature of North's writing center philosophy. The aim to change better writers, but not necessarily their texts, as learner states, can, in the case of ESL students, conflict with a desire to produce better writers. Learner conveys that a tutor's purpose is not to aid a student in changing a particular piece of writing, but instilling them with an improved ability to convey ideas. Tutors' abstention from addressing sentence-level concerns exists as a central tenet in writing center pedagogy. Addressing sentence-level or lower-order concerns may be defined as temporary fixes that fall under changing a student's specific text. In this sense, focusing on grammar does not align with writing center philosophy. However, in the case of ESL students, grammatical concerns may inhibit and reduce their ability to convey and articulate ideas. Method of approaching grammatical assistance for ESL students. Addressing sentence-level concerns does not have to conflict with the vision of the writing center. It's all about how tutors approach it. Despite the fear of some writing center philosophers, including Lerner, while it has the potential to, assistance with grammar in the Writing Center is not inherently conformant to a fix-it-shop paradigm, in which tutors act merely as editors. A distinction must be made between proofreading and helping a student become a better self-editor, without relying on the assistance of others. As Muriel Harris and Tony Silva delineate in Tutoring ESL Students Issues and Options, a useful method for assisting ESL students with their grammar is reading their writing aloud to them, and through this, some students are able to find their own mistakes, even add omitted articles. Harris and Silva do, however, note that ESL students with a higher level of proficiency will have more success with reading aloud, and that outside help may be beneficial to those students who don't respond well to this method. Harris and Silva's point about seeking outside help exists as an aspect of a controversial topic amongst Writing Center philosophers and theorists. While some Writing Centers hold to the belief that the Writing Center is the single and final destination for help, others share the belief that, as expressed by a professor in the article, Let's Talk, ESL Students Needs in Writing Center Philosophy. If ESL students have major problems, they should take a writing course, hire a tutor, or get an editor. This kind of approach to help in the Writing Center is extremely exclusive and only caters to students who have the resources to seek outside help, which more often than not excludes ESL students. Our proposal for a solution to this is something Westridge Writing Center tutors have already begun: optional lunchtime workshops, which are open to all Westridge students. Within these, tutors can dive deep into sentence level concerns such as grammar and syntax. Workshops will hold to the established Writing Center theory in the sense that tutors are supplying students with the abilities to improve their writing without acting as editors. But they also broaden Writing Center theory by openly welcoming discussions and lessons around sentence level concerns, thus creating more inclusivity within the Writing Center. As Lucy Musu points out, there is sometimes a tension between what an ESL or ELL students want out of a session, which is often help with surface features in grammar, and what tutors have been trained to address, which is oriented towards writing process and development of ideas. As a tutor at Westridge's Writing Center, I have had an experience in the center in which an ESL student asked me for help with grammar, specifically syntax, the way she had structured her sentences. As I read her writing, the issues with not only syntax, but also word choice and punctuation were so prominent to the point where I was having a hard time understanding simply the ideas she was trying to convey. This was where I experienced that tension that Musu explains. It was a moment of slight panic that I hadn't experienced as a tutor, because unlike with grammar, I knew how to help students work through ideas and analysis because I had been trained and I had training and practice with that. But I had no idea how to go about requests for grammatical help. On one hand, I knew I shouldn't act as an editor. That's a norm that has been heavily emphasized throughout all of my trainings. But I also knew that my job as an editor was to help students improve their writing and ability to articulate ideas. So in that sense, I experienced tension between two conflicting aspects of my trainings in the Westridge Writing Center. Interactions in the center such as this have led us to believe that in order for the Writing Center to be more inclusive and equitable, tutors need to be made aware in their trainings of the different types of vernaculars and how different vernaculars influence students' writing needs. These training sessions would incorporate both a base level understanding of how vernaculars interact with standard English and methods of approaching sentence level requests such as the reading aloud method we noted. We believe that trainings geared towards awareness of the needs of ESL students eliminates, at least in part, that tension previously mentioned. Tutors will no longer view sentence level requests as forbidden, but rather as a manageable opportunity to help students feel more confident writing within the parameters of standard academic English.
Okay, so to go over our research, in addition to reading literature and current practices within the Writing Center, we also conducted a survey of our own. It was distributed to current Westridge students who have visited the Writing Center at least once. Through this survey, our goal was to understand how students at our school felt about their experiences working with the Writing Center coaches. More specifically, we hope to draw clear connections between one's experience in the Writing Center and the practice of speaking standard English. In order to achieve this goal, we ask questions about student satisfaction levels with the feedback they received at the Writing Center, how the students felt about their interactions with the coach, and whether they felt that the Writing Center fostered diversity, equity, and inclusion. To be fully transparent and give context for the results I am about to share, I think it's necessary that I address some of the biases and challenges we faced when collecting data. Firstly, Maya and I go to an all-girls private school. This gives our school and Writing Center an economic advantage. Our Writing Center has a budget which allows us to purchase educational materials and gain access to databases that may aid in furthering DEI work inside a Writing Center. Secondly, our school is located in Pasadena, California. In Southern California features an incredibly diverse population, and this diversity manifests on our school campus and within the Writing Center. And then this is another thing to keep in mind when contextualizing our methods and approaches to helping ESL students. And lastly, I wanted to note that it was challenging to collect survey data. We struggled to collect responses to the survey despite urging our friends and classmates to fill the survey out. And these variables do make our results biased, and they are something to, once again, just keep in mind as you reflect over how you may incorporate these practices into your own Writing Center. So after reading the literature and conducting our survey, Maya and I have drawn some conclusions on not only why ESL students approach the Writing Center, but also how coaches can effectively approach ESL students. I'm gonna move this thing over here. Okay. So I wanted to share one response we received from our survey, which says, I think I have a solid grasp of using standard English, but in terms of academic writing, my grammar interferes with the message I am trying to get across. And this student was prompted to share their understanding of vernacular. This testimony shows that grammar and language proficiency are barriers that hinder some students from expressing their ideas clearly and concisely. ESL students who may not be as familiar with the syntactical rules of sentences may share similar experiences to the students. Although many ESL students have amazing ideas and are able to critically think, they struggle with transferring these ideas onto paper, and thus they may come to the Writing Center seeking grammatical help and proofreading services. Without a coach's aid, an ESL student's writing may not be an accurate reflection of their ability to critically think or write. And knowing that ESL students visit the Writing Center seeking proofreading services makes proofreading an issue to address within the Writing Center. As Maya pointed out earlier, proofreading and the Writing Center philosophy of coaches not holding a pen in their hands does not always align with the students' needs or wants. Writing centers thus need to reflect on where they believe proofreading falls on the hierarchy of issues to address within their institution. While it is important to make sure that students are self-reflecting and facilitating progress made inside the Writing Center, we do not want to ignore our students' needs, even if it entails proofreading. In order to ensure that a Writing Center is diverse, equitable, and an inclusive space, all students must find ways to have their issues addressed, including ESL learners. So Maya and I have read a few strategies in literature and come up with some of our own that may aid Writing Centers in effectively addressing the concerns of ESL students. As Maya mentioned earlier, a coach can read a student's paper back to the student. In many cases, ESL students who have higher levels of proficiency are able to hear and identify any awkward phrasing or syntactical issues. And once a student notices the awkwardness or grammar errors, the coach can jump in and work with the student to make their ideas clearer. And this practice ensures that the progress being made is student-led. It also ensures that writing centers avoid crossing the fine line between editing and coaching. Furthermore, coaches can practice using the phrase, "please explain," as a substitute for the traditional why or how question opener. Framing questions using "please explain" generates open-ended responses that lead to more insightful interactions. And thus, we encourage writing centers to consider incorporating this phrase into their list of ways to ask thought-provoking questions. A writing center can also opt to host workshops, whether they be weekly or monthly. This is a practice that our school has recently put into place, and the aim of such workshops is to address grammatical errors and sentence level concerns that students express worry about. ESL students could greatly benefit from these workshops and walk away with strategies that influence their writing processes and confidence. And lastly, we hope that writing centers will reflect on the prevalence of the typical AWK or awkward comment written on papers. This is a common comment that students receive on their feedback and a big reason for visiting the writing center. It highlights the importance of incorporating practices that include ESL students and address grammatical errors. Okay, so both pictures on this slide are screenshots from our Westridge Writing Center Instagram page. Social media is another effective way of sharing information with individuals, especially teenagers. We post writing center updates and writing tips on our Instagram to increase the accessibility of the writing tips. And so I want to quickly share some statistics with you all on standard English. 20% of our participants felt somewhat comfortable using writing, or they felt comfortable writing in standard English, and another 20% felt incredibly uncomfortable writing in standard English. But all 100% of our participants felt that speaking in standard English did not limit their experience at the writing center. In fact, many ESL speakers learn standard English to gain power and access to a group they would otherwise be excluded from. So in a twisted sense, mastering standard English and being able to speak and write in the language of the oppressor promotes the inclusion of a group that is traditionally excluded. And this is a heavy and uncomfortable topic, but nevertheless one we must address if we want the Writing Center to be a more diverse, equitable, and inclusive space. When Maya and I first began our research, we believed that the practice of using standard English imposed a limitation on how people could choose to express themselves. However, in post-colonialism and the idea of a writing center, authors Anis Bawarshi and Stephanie Polkowski investigate the role of acculturation in academic discourses and write about how the Writing Center must be a place in which marginalized students can gain a critical consciousness. They center their argument around mestiza consciousness, an idea introduced by Gloria Andaluza. Essentially, Bawarshi and Pelkowski write about the way that mestiza consciousness and usage of the dominant language can be used to both decolonize the Writing Center and help marginalized students learn to reclaim power. Additionally, mestiza consciousness reconstructs the Writing Center as a contact zone of cultures. This is more food for thought and something to keep in mind as I share the practices the Writing Centers can incorporate on the next slide. Okay, so one way that writing centers can be mindful in coaching students familiar with other vernacular dialects is by finding fellows who are familiar with a specific vernacular. This is because those fellows can take into account different vernacular dialects, which is crucial to helping students master standard English. Perhaps one way to actually do this is by including a question on the Writing Center application that asks the prospective coach to state whether they are familiar with other languages. If your Writing Center does not have an application process, perhaps you can consider creating one. Code switching is another tool to utilize within the Writing Center. Rather than correct students, coaches can help students understand the differences between standard English and other vernaculars. Understanding these differences and conventions of both standard English and their own language can help the students successfully switch between the vernaculars. And lastly, we wanted to point out that no language is inherently wrong, they're just different. Tutors need to understand that they are not trying to fix a student or their writing. And so lastly, we have our conclusions, and these are ideas that we hope you'll take away from listening to our presentation. In order for the Writing Center to be a diverse and equal place, English second language students must benefit from the center and see reason to return. And this can happen in several ways, as we've outlined below. First, coaches can undergo training so that they are equipped to approach conversations with students who may need help with structural and organizational aspects of their writing. Secondly, writing centers can host workshops for their students. These workshops can help fix language fluidity issues and make the writing center more resourceful. The goal is to help the center maximize resources to help all writers, including ESL students. Next, coaches can read papers to students to train students to listen for their own mistakes. Writing centers can also hire tutors who are familiar with different languages or vernacular dialects so they can aid ESL students in code switching. Lastly, on the ideological level, writing centers can think about their philosophy and how much it promotes diversity, equity, and inclusion. Maya and I ultimately decided that the practice of communicating in standard English is one that should be kept. And also note that many of the problems that we are asking writing centers to grapple with are not ones that can be resolved immediately. A student cannot improve his or her writing process overnight. And oftentimes, a single visit to the writing center right before a paper is due does not give coaches enough time to thoroughly sit down and address all of a student's concerns. So yeah, that's the end of our presentation.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Gal.